In this video, we're going to connect our Angular application that is on the left side to our .NET Web API that is on the right side. And at the moment, these two apps, they're not connected. Let me show how it works. So in our Angular application, we have this data and it's all hard-coded at the moment. I can update this data, delete data. Let me just delete one of the records. But as soon as I refresh it, it's gonna go back to the original data. The reason for that is because all this data is coming from this contact service. And as you can see here, we have an array of data. And these three objects, those are the objects that displayed on the screen. Let me go back. Our address book API is connected to a database. And if we look at our contacts, let's try it out, execute. We have these three objects. This data is coming from the database. Let's look at it. So if I go back to our Visual Studio and I go to this SQL Server Object Explorer, as you can see, we have this data table, dbo.contacts. I'm going to right click on it, view data, and these are the records we can see on the screen. Let me go back. So at the end of this video, this front-end application will be getting data from our database via this web API, and it will also be able to get contact by ID, create new contact, update contact, and delete contact. Before we start working on it, I want to mention a couple of things. In this video, we're going to get these projects from GitHub, but if you already built these projects using previous tutorials, you can just continue working on them. The only thing you would need to adjust, let me go back to Visual Studio. I did a little cleanup, so if I go to this contact CS file, as you might remember, we had two extra properties. We had a middle name property and a credit card property, so I removed them because we don't need them for our front end. And after you do that, make sure you go to this DB context class and adjust these objects inside this method. Because if you have middle name and credit card properties here, you're gonna get an error since this contact class doesn't have those properties anymore. So let's start working on our application. And like I mentioned, the first step will be pull those two projects from GitHub. This is my GitHub page and you will need this URL. I'm gonna put it in the description of this video. I'm gonna click on this code button and I'm gonna copy this URL by pressing this icon. This is our Angular application, so I'm going to be using VS Code. But before I open VS Code, I will go to a folder I already created. I call it Address Book, and I'm going to right click inside this folder, and I'm going to click on Open in Terminal. And as you can see, I'm already inside this address book. And here I'm going to type git clone, and I'm going to paste that URL, enter. Now let's look in the folder. So as you can see, I have this project. Let me close it, and I'm gonna go inside this folder and I'm gonna do the same thing, open in terminal. And I'm doing it because I'm too lazy to type all this. I just want to be inside this folder before I open it in VS Code. So here I'm gonna type code space dot, press enter. And my project is now open in VS Code. I'm gonna click on view and open the terminal. And before I run this project, I need to install dependencies. We never keep dependencies in source control because they take too much space and there is no reason to keep it there. We can just download it when we are ready to run our application. So to bring those dependencies, we're going to type npm install or just npm I. And after I press enter, a folder will be created and all dependencies will be loaded inside that folder. So let me press enter. As you can see now, we have this folder, node modules. And all these dependencies are being loaded inside this folder. The list of those dependencies you can find inside this package lar.json. Our application is ready to run. Before you run it, make sure you're inside this folder. If you're not inside this folder, you're gonna get an error. I'm gonna type ngserve space -o. And this -o flag will open the browser after application is compiled. I'm going to press enter. And as you can see, our application is successfully compiled. Let me go to contacts. And here's our data. Let me just try to delete it. It works. And when I refresh, the data will be back. So our Angular application is ready to go. Let's load our .NET Web API application now. I'm going to go to GitHub again. And this time we will need this application, Address Book API with Entity Framework. So I'm going to click on it. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on code, copy this URL, and I'm going to go back to that folder. Let me go up one level, and I already have this terminal. Let me close it. So right here inside this folder, inside this address book folder, I'm going to right click, open in terminal, and I'm going to type git clone and paste that link, Control V, and press enter. So we have now this folder here. I'm going to go inside this folder, and I'm going to right click on this solution file. I'm going to go to open with, and I'm going to choose this Microsoft Visual Studio 2022. And our application is ready to go. So if I run an application, it's gonna work for me because I have a database and this application is connecting to a database. But if you try to run it because you don't have the database, your application is gonna fail. I'm gonna show it really quick. So if I run the application, it's gonna be successfully compiled. So I'm gonna click here, try it out, execute, and I'm gonna get the data. Let me close it. So now when I go inside our SQL Server Object Explorer, let me show you right away where to find it. So if you go to View, it's going to be right here, SQL Server Object Explorer. So I'm going to open it. Now, if you don't have it displayed here, so you'll have to click on this Add SQL Server, and you're going to click on this local, MS SQL Local DB, and leave everything as default. If there's nothing here, choose Windows Authentication, and when you click Connect, you're going to have the same option here. When you go inside your SQL Server and inside your databases table, you'll probably won't have anything there. So I'm going to delete this database right now. And if I try to run my application, it's going to compile, but when I try to get the data, execute, I'm gonna get this error. To fix this error, we'll have to create a database, and Entity Framework makes it really easy to do that. Let me show you how to do it. First, we're gonna go to our models and open this DB context file. This file is like a map between our application and the database, and this line 11 tells Entity Framework that we would like to create a table, and the name of the table is going to be context, and the column names inside this table is going to come from this contact class. Let me open this contact class. We're going to have 5 columns: ID, first name, last name, phone, and address. And after Entity Framework creates this table, this method will let us load our initial data. This method is optional, so you don't have to have it. But if you don't have this method, then you would have to go to the database and manually create all the data inside our database. So this is just convenient to have this method and have it loaded on database creation. Now the name of the database will come from this app setting JSON file. This is going to be the name of our database, Address-Book-DB. And as you can see, this database will be located on a server with this name, MS SQL Local DB. So to create a database, we need to run 2 commands, and we're going to use this Package Manager console. If you don't have it here, let me close it. You will need to go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and click on this Package Manager console. The first command we're going to execute is add migration. It's add-migration. And we can call this migration anything we want. I'm going to call it initial. Press enter. As you can see, we now have an extra folder. It's called migrations. If I expand it, we're going to have 2 files. And one of the files is already open. You can look at it. And this is like instructions, what Entity Framework should do to create this database. Let me go back to the Package Manager console. And our second command will be update database. Press enter. If anything goes wrong, you're going to have an error here, but it looks like everything went fine here. So I'm going to refresh our server. I'm going to right click and click refresh. As you can see, we have a new database, Address-Book-DB. Let me expand it. Expand tables. And here I have 2 tables, 1 context. Let me right click on it, view data. As you can see, we have initial data that we wanted to load inside our table. And inside this migrations history table, let me right click on it, view data. We have the name of our initial migration. This number has been added by Entity Framework, and it's a random number, so every migration has a unique name. And this table is used by Entity Framework to keep track of all modification to our database. So let me close it and let me run our application. Let's try to get the data. Try it out. Execute. As you can see, we're getting an array of 3 objects. In our next step, we're going to modify our Angular application to get this data and display it on the screen. Let's go to VS Code. Let me close this, and we're going to go inside our source folder, app folder. We have a folder for services, but inside we have only one service, so we're going to double click on it. And this service is responsible for getting data. Right now it's hard-coded, but after we modify everything, this data is going to be coming from our web API. Let's start modifying it. To get data from our web API, we need to send an HTTP request, and to do that, we need a special package. Let's go to our app module TS file. Quick side note, if you created this application in Angular 17 and up, you might not have this app module TS file, and in that case, you would need to import this package directly into your TS file. But since we have this app module TS file, let's use it. I'm gonna scroll down. And inside this imports array, at the end I'm gonna put a comma, make some space, and I'm gonna type HTTP client module. As you can see, it's here on the list. I'm gonna click on it. And VS Code will help me, and it will bring this import statement right here. VS Code shows that they have one unsaved file. I'm gonna save it. You can go to File and click Save, or you can just press Ctrl S. And now that we have this module imported, let's go back to our service. And here inside our constructor, we're going to inject an HTTP client. So here inside parentheses, I'm going to type private. And I can call it anything I want. I'll call it HTTP colon. And I'm going to type HTTP client. And it's here on the list. As you can see, I also have an import statement that is bringing this HTTP client from this Angular common HTTP. In the next step, let's modify our getContacts method. Let me comment out this line. And here I'm gonna type return this HTTP, and it's right here on the list. Now if I press period, as you can see here, we have a list of different methods. We're gonna use this method get. I'm gonna put parentheses, and I'm gonna close it with semicolon so I don't forget it. And inside this parentheses, we need a URL, single quotation marks. And I'm gonna go back to our web API service. Let me run it. I'm gonna execute it. And this is the URL I'm gonna be using. So I'm gonna highlight it, Control C to copy it. Let's go back to VS Code, and I'm gonna paste inside these quotation marks our URL. Let me save it, Control S. As you can see, right away we're getting an error. And the reason for this error, because right here, when we return the data, we are not returning an array anymore. We're returning, let's point on this get method, and here you can see we're returning an observable. So we need to go to our TS file where we get this data and process it differently. Let's do that. First of all, let me stop this application, Control C. And I'm gonna go inside this folder context. And this is our TS file, TypeScript file. Let me make a little bit more space. I'm gonna click on this Explorer. And this is where we get our data inside this ng-on-init method. As you can see here, we're calling our service, contact service, and we're getting data from our getContacts method. Now, this service is being injected inside this constructor. So we say private contact service. This is the name of the service, and this is the service where we have all code. So we need to modify this. So let me just comment it out. And here I'm gonna call this service, get that observable, and process it. And we're going to do it differently, compare how we did it right here. So let's call this service. We're going to say this context service dot, and the name of the method get context. I'm going to put parentheses. And at the end, I'm going to put dot. And as you can see, we have this method subscribe. I'm going to select it, parentheses. And for now, I'm going to put at the end semicolon. I'm going to go back inside the parentheses. I'm going to put curly braces. And here, the first block is going to be next. So I'm going to type next, colon. And in parentheses, I'm going to put data. And you can call it anything you want. You can say my data or observable data. It doesn't matter. I'm going to just say data. And it's going to be an arrow function. So I'm going to put equal sign, triangle bracket. Again, curly braces. And for now, let's just console log this data. So I'm going to type console log. And inside, I'm going to say data. At the end of this block, I'm going to put comma. And our next block is going to be an arrow block. So if something goes wrong and we don't get data that we are supposed to get, it's going to go to the arrow block. So I'm going to type arrow, colon. And here again, I can call it anything I want. I'm going to just say ERR, arrow function. Same thing. And here I'm going to just say the same thing, console log, and we're going to console log error instead of data. One more block, I'm going to put comma here. And I'm going to say complete. Again, colon. And here we don't have anything. So, but again, arrow function. And code inside this block is going to be executed only if our call is completed successfully. So I'm going to just say here console log. And I'm going to say data loaded successfully. I'm going to save it, Control S. And let's run our application. I'm going to type ngserve-o. Let's click context. As you can see, I don't have any data. Let's look at the developer tools. There are 3 ways to get there. You can press Ctrl-Shift-I, F12, or you can just go to this menu, go to More Tools, and click on Developer Tools. Let me click Console. And if you are not on a network tab, make sure you click on this network tab. Let me refresh it. As you can see, I have a couple errors. My call was unsuccessful. And for status, it says course error. Let me click on it. The status code is actually 200. And it means I communicated with the back end successfully. But if I look at the response, I didn't get any data. To fix this error, we need to talk about course policies, how it works, and what we need to do to fix this error. I'm going to place this URL in the description of the video. Let's click on this link that says how course works. And here we can read that course is a W3C standard that allows a server to elect the same origin policy. What is the same origin policy? If I go back to our web API, Swagger UI, as you can see, if we call this data from here, we get the data on the screen. Because this application is running on localhost port 7271. When we call our data from this Address-Book-Angular application, our port is different. Our port is here 4200. So the course policy is a browser feature. The way it works, before the browser sends an HTTP call, it looks at this HTTP request and it decides what it wants to do. If it's not the same origin, a few things happen. First thing it does, it looks at these headers. So we have request headers listed right here. Let's go back to our website. I'm gonna go all the way back up and I'm gonna click on this Preflight request. Preflight request, it's a request that is sent before the main HTTP request. The preflight request is an optional request. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. Here we can read that the browser can skip the preflight request if all of the following conditions are true. In our case, it's a get method, so this condition is true. And the second condition, the app doesn't set request headers other than, and we have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 headers. If we look on our request, we have much more headers than just 5 headers listed there. So in our case, we're going to have a preflight request. When preflight happens, our front-end application will communicate with our web service and will verify if not the same origin calls are okay. By default, in our web API application, not the same origin calls are not allowed. At this point, we need to come to this web API service and configure it to allow requests from different origin. To do that, we need to go to this program CS file, and we need to add some code configuring those cross-origin request policies. Let's go back to our website and see what code we need to place here. Let me go all the way up again, and I'm gonna click on this enable course with attributes. Let me scroll down. This piece of code shows the controller, and it shows that we can enable course with different policies. So in our program CS file, we can configure multiple different policies. Let me scroll down a little bit. And I'm gonna copy this code starting from builder up until this point. I'm gonna copy it back to Visual Studio. I'm going to make space under line 12, and I'm gonna paste all that code, Control V. Now we have policy 1, and we have another policy right here. Let me rename this policy 1 into my policy. You can name it anything you want. And here under policy, I need to list all URLs from where the calls are going to be allowed. If we look at our Angular application, this is our origin, localhost port 4200. So I'm going to just copy that, Control C, and I'm going to place it here. I'm going to remove the second one, and I'm going to save it. This is the configuration we added. Now we're going to start using that policy that we name my policy. Let's go back to the Microsoft website, and here you can see it says use course. Let me copy that, Control C, let's go back. And before this use authorization, I'm going to just add this line, Control V. Let me save it. And the last thing we need to do, let me go up a little bit. We need to add this line inside our controller. I'm going to copy it, Control C. Let's go back, and I'm going to go to our controller. This is our context controller. And instead of applying to each method separately, I'm going to just apply to the whole class. So I'm going to make space. I also need to rename it because we rename it to my policy. Policy 1 is going to be my policy. Let me stop the application, save it, and restart it again. Let's try to make that call again from our Angular application and see what happens. Let me open the developer tools, Control-Shift-I, and I'm going to refresh the application. As you can see, we get an error again. Let me go back and look here again. So the error I made, I put this /, and we don't need it. Let me save it again. And usually you need to stop an application and restart it again. Little error like that can break everything, so I need to pay attention to that. So let's try it again. I'm gonna restart it. As you can see, it says data loaded successfully. Let me expand it. As you can see, we have our data. And if I click on this all context and I'm inside this response, we have 3 objects here. Let's now go back to VS Code and display this data on the screen. I'm gonna delete this code on line 40. We don't need it. Control X. And I don't need this console log line. Control X. So let me grab this. I'm gonna cut it. Control X and bring it right here. Line 31. Control V. Now we have this context data array. Let's look at this. So this is an array of objects. So I'm gonna just copy it. And here what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say this. Context data array equals data, semicolon. Now we need to change the data type, an array of contact type, so I'm gonna delete it, and I'm gonna put any. Let me save it. Let's go back. The error is gone. I'm gonna console log this data source. Console log this data source. Control S to save. Back to our Angular application, refresh. Let's look at the data. And we have a data, but it's not being displayed. And the reason for that, because as you can see here, our property starts with lowercase and it's called camel case. And if we go to our contact interface, let me go to interfaces, contact. All properties are starting with the uppercase and it's called Pascal case. We can fix it in a few different ways, but the easiest way is to refactor this interface. I'm gonna change all uppercase to lowercase. Save Control S. And I need to change it also inside our contact service. So first of all, I don't need this anymore here. Let me comment it out. So the way I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna press Control K, Control C. Let me go down and see what happens here. I'm gonna just comment out everything here because we're gonna be changing it anyway. Control K, Control C. Here too. Same here. Control K, Control C. And the last method, Control K, Control C. Now one more little change. When we get our data, we want it to convert right away to the array of objects. So here after get, I'm gonna put triangle brackets and I'm gonna say contact. And this is our interface. I'm gonna save it, Control S. We have more errors. Let me see where those errors are. Let's fix it one by one. We need to go to new contact, component TS, and it's line 28. New contact, component TS, line 28. So we need to change all these properties to lowercase. Let me save it. Next error is gonna be inside our update dialog. Right here. We have this place too, same thing. Alright, this one is done. Let me save it. Let's see if delete dialog needs changes too. Yes, it does. I could probably do it globally and change it all the same time using VS Code tools, but I'm already doing it. So let me save that. All right, let me look at our front end. So here it's gonna be lowercase, same here. Phone number and address. Let's see if it works. As you can see, we have data successfully displayed. Let's modify our next method, and it's gonna be new contact. Let's go back to VS Code and start working on that. Let's close all windows here. I'm gonna right click on a tab and select close all. And I'm gonna minimize everything. So it's gonna be new contact, and it's gonna be our new contact TS file. Here we have our onSubmit method, and this is where we call our create contact method. Let's go to our service, new contact, and we're going to just remove everything inside this method. Here we're going to create an HTTP request. Let me look at our web API. So let me close everything else with the exception of this context controller. I'm going to select close all by this. I'm going to scroll down. This is our method, create contact. And it's a post request right here. We are getting our new contact. So DTO, it means data transfer object. So we're getting our data right here from the body of the request. So we validate our data. So we need to have that data. And after that, we call our contact service create contact method and pass the information there. And let's go really quick inside this create contact method. I'm going to right click and select go to implementation. This is where we pass our information. We create a new object, pass all information into that object, and then using entity framework we add it. This is just happening in the memory. And this method save changes async is actually going to make changes inside the database. At the end, we pass this newly created contact to our mapper. Let me just go there too. We're returning a DTO. Let me go back. And at the end, after all the work is done, we're actually returning back this newly created contact. So let me go back to VS Code, and I'm gonna use our HTTP service. and it's gonna be our post request. And as you remember, we're gonna return a newly created context, so I'm gonna say return in the beginning. And when it comes back, I want to convert it into an object of type contact, parentheses. And this post method will take two parameters. One is gonna be our URL, and then we're gonna pass this new contact object. So now I need to place a URL. So as far as I remember, let me copy the whole thing. And instead of all contacts, it's going to be update contact. Let me save it, Control S. So this method is ready. Let me just make it a little bit better looking. Control S to save. And again, this post method is going to return an observable right here. So when we pass it back to our TS file, we need to handle it differently. So let me comment it out. And the way we're gonna pass it, we're gonna use our service. It was injected via constructor right here. So the name with this contact service. So I'm gonna type this contact service, and I'm gonna choose this create contact method, and I'm gonna pass this new contact. And of course, we need to subscribe to this method, parentheses, semicolon, and inside those parentheses, I'm gonna put curly braces. And again, the structure of our call is gonna be exactly the same, what we did inside our contacts component TS. So let me just grab the whole thing, Control C, Control V. And here we don't need all this. And here I'm gonna change just created successfully. Let me save it, Control S. And let's test our application. So I'm gonna go back to our Angular application. Let me refresh it. And I'm going to put some data here. Let's press create. I have another error for course. Let's go back to our web API and see what happens there. I need to go back to our program CS. Let's add these two methods, allow any header and allow any method to our configuration. Let me just copy it, Control C, Control V, Control S to save. Let me just stop and restart it. Let's go back to our Angular application. Let me restart it. And I just noticed I made a mistake. Instead of create contact, I put update contact. So let me change that. Control S to save. Let me go back to our application. I'm gonna restart it. And I'm gonna go to new contact. And I have to type it again. Let's press create. And as you can see, contact created successfully. Let's go back to our database. I'm gonna right click and select view data. As you can see, we have another contact here. Let's now work on our update method. Let's go back to VS Code. I'm gonna close these two files. I'm just gonna leave this contact service. So update contact. I'm gonna make some space. And it's gonna be really similar. So I'm gonna just copy this line. So I'm gonna press Control C. And I'm gonna bring it here, Control V, and now I'm gonna change it to update contact. Let's look at our web API. Our controller, update contact is gonna take this object, and it's our put request, and it's gonna return an updated contact. Let's go back, and I'm gonna remove this post, and I'm gonna type put. And here, instead of new contact, it's gonna be update contact. And I think that's all I need here. Control S to save. Now I need to go to our dialogues, and I'm gonna open our update dialog, TS file. Let me find that place where I call that method. And this is our onSubmit method. So first we're constructing this object that we're gonna send to our web API, and here we're calling our method and we're passing this updated contact object. So let me comment out this part. And again, it's going to be really similar to what we're doing to create a new contact. Let me just go there and copy this block of code. So I'm gonna grab this, Control C, go back, and I'm gonna place it here. I don't need this, Control X. Here we're calling our update contact method, and we're passing this update contact object. And this contact service, let's see how we call it here. So we call it contact service. I'll just change this S, and we're subscribing to that method, and we're gonna get the data back, and we're gonna cancel it. And I think it all looks good. Let me save it, Control S, and let's try it out. I'm gonna go to our Angular application, and let's update our last contact. I'm gonna press update, and let's just say it's gonna be Mary 1, Smith 1, and we're gonna change 1 to 2, and here we're gonna change 1 to 2. Let's update it. It says contact created successfully. Of course, we need to change it here to update it, so we don't get confused. And let's go to our database, and here we can just refresh it. As you can see, our data has been successfully updated. We have our last delete method. Let's modify that. I'm gonna go to our contact service, and this is our delete contact method. And let's see how it looks in our web API. I'm gonna go to our controller. This is our delete method. So as you can see, there are a couple different things. First, we're not sending data in a body. Here we're sending it in a body. And here we're sending it in URL. And also, instead of returning an object like here, we're returning text. So we need to adjust our methods to those two changes. Let's go back to VS Code. So right here, I'm just gonna copy this line. So I'm gonna just say Control C, and I'm gonna paste it here, Control V. Now, we're not gonna pass it in the body, so let me just remove it. And instead of put, it's gonna be delete. Also, now instead of putting this URL here, let's make an adjustment. And let's create a URL string, and we'll just call it URL string. And it's gonna be type of string. And it's gonna be this. I'm gonna just copy, Control C, Control V, and we're gonna say add this ID, semicolon, and here we need a /. And of course I need to put here let. And instead of this line, we're gonna just say URL string. Let's go to our delete. It should be inside our dialogues. It's right here. TS file, delete dialog. Let's scroll down and find our onSubmit method. It's right here. So we are finding our contact ID, and we're calling our method right here and passing this ID to that method. So let's comment it out. And we're gonna copy paste all this again, so we don't have to type it. Control C, Control V, and the method is going to be delete method, and we're going to pass this contact ID. Here let's change contact deleted successfully. Let me save it, and let's try it out. Let me refresh it, and let's delete our last record. I'm going to press delete, again delete. We again have course error, so let's look what's happening. As you can see, I didn't make this change. Instead of update contact, should be delete contact. So let me go back to our service, and right here I need to say delete contact. Let me save it, and let's try it again. Refresh, delete, delete, and it looks like it went through. Response, the contact has been deleted. It looks like we need to refresh the page, but other than that it should be good. Let's look at our database, and I'm gonna just refresh it. As you can see, Mary 1 Smith was deleted successfully. Let's see if we can fix this refresh error. So right now, if I refresh this, the record is gone, but I want our page to be refreshed every time we delete the contact. So let's go to VS Code, delete dialog, After the data is deleted, we are closing this dialog. And after we close this dialog, we need to refresh the table. Let's go to our context component TS and see what we are doing there. So as you can see here, we have a method after closed. After our dialog closed, we were refreshing our table by passing this new array. So it was our old way. This was our array that we kept in our service locally. So this time what we need to do, we need to call our web API and get the updated data and bring it back. So it looks like we are calling our update data source method. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna keep it the same way, but instead of passing data, we're gonna remove that. And we're not gonna pass any data here. So we're gonna just call this method update data source. And here, we're actually gonna call again our web API and get the updated data. So let me go up. As you can see, we're doing it here. So instead of doing it inside this method and duplicating this code, I'm gonna grab all this, Control X, and I'm gonna put it inside this update data source method. And I'm gonna grab the name of this method. And I'm gonna put inside this ng underneath method. Of course, I need to add this. And it means it belongs to this class. Let me save it. Control S. And I'm getting an error because I need to fix this part. I'm gonna comment it out. Control S. Let me go to our Angular application, and if I refresh, I get the data. Let me delete it. As soon as I deleted it, the record is gone from the screen. I think I need to do the same thing for the update method. Let me try to update it. So I'm gonna just put John 1 update. As you can see, I don't see anything here. Let me go back to VS Code. And inside this onUpdate method, I'm gonna put this block of code too. So after the dialog is closed, we're gonna call this update data source method. Control C. I'm gonna make some space here. Control V, Control S to save. We go to our Angular application. I'm gonna refresh, update. Let's do John 2 here. Let's change it to 3. Change it to 2. Update. As you can see, our data is changed. At this point, our Angular application is fully connected to our web API. I'm gonna go through our project and delete all this commented out code so the application looks clean. And I'm gonna put it in GitHub, and the link will be in the description of this video. I hope this video was helpful, and thank you for watching.